Before we start, please make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends and family. Also, can you please tell me where and what time you're watching? Thanks. It was supposed to be just another normal night out. A simple, laid-back movie date with my girlfriend. Nothing out of the ordinary, nothing even remotely exciting. Just the kind of quiet night we both needed. The plan was simple. Pick a movie, grab some snacks, and enjoy a couple of hours in the comfort of a dark theater, escaping reality for a little while. The theater wasn't too packed when we arrived, which I liked. It was late enough that most of the big crowds had already come and gone. The last few showings of the night always had this peaceful atmosphere. Just scattered groups of people, minding their own business, settling in for the final screenings. We found our seats easily, near the middle of the auditorium. The previews started rolling, a mix of upcoming blockbusters and indie films. I wasn't paying much attention. I was comfortable, the room was dimly lit, and I was already halfway sinking into that pre-movie relaxation. Then my girlfriend leaned in and whispered, "I'm kind of hungry." I turned to her and smirked. "Didn't we just eat before we got here?" She shrugged, giving me that playful, innocent look she always did when she wanted something. I didn't think I'd be hungry, but now I am. I sighed, but it wasn't like I actually minded. "All right, I'll go grab something. You stay here." "Are you sure?" she asked. Yeah, I'll be fast." I got up, stretched slightly, and made my way down the aisle toward the exit. The second I stepped out of the theater and into the lobby, the contrast hit me. Bright lights, low, distant murmurs of conversation, the occasional beep of a register, the scent of buttered popcorn and something fried. There were a few other people in the lobby, some in line for food, others just hanging around waiting for their movies to start. I took my place at the back of the concession stand line, shifting my weight from foot to foot, glancing at the menu overhead even though I already knew the basic selection. That was when I heard my name. "Hey, Nestor!" I turned automatically, caught off guard. The guy standing in front of me was smiling like he knew me. I blinked, trying to place him. Nothing. He looked about my age, maybe a little rougher around the edges. Something about him was vaguely familiar, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Before I could even ask, he spoke again. "You don't remember me, huh?" I hesitated. Should I?" He laughed lightly. "Lucas, man. You remember Lucas, right?" That name made me pause. Lucas. Yeah, I remembered him. We'd been pretty good friends in high school, played football together, ran in the same circles. But after graduation, we drifted apart. He went one way, I went another. It had been a couple of years since I last saw him. Hearing his name made me relax a little. If this guy knew Lucas, maybe I did know him at some point. Maybe I had just forgotten. "He's here," the guy said, grinning. "Come on, he'd love to see you. Just around the corner." I hesitated again. I still needed to grab food for my girlfriend. But catching up with an old friend? That didn't sound so bad. "Yeah, all right," I said. "But I gotta be quick." "Won't take long," the guy promised. He turned and led the way. I followed. We moved away from the main area of the lobby, heading toward the quieter side of the theater, the hallway leading to some of the smaller screening rooms. It wasn't a part of the building I'd normally walk through, and as we went deeper in, the noise of the lobby faded behind us. Something about that silence made the hairs on my arms prickle. We took a turn, then another. The lighting in this part of the theater was dimmer, more subdued, fewer people, fewer exits. I started to feel the first real sliver of unease slide into my gut. Then I saw them. At the far end of the hallway near a single theater entrance, a small group of guys was standing together. 3, maybe 4 of them. All of them were wearing ski masks. That was the moment everything in me tensed. Even with their faces covered, I knew one thing immediately. None of them were Lucas. I stopped walking. My pulse spiked. My body went stiff. The guys in the masks all turned, not toward the guy who had led me here, but toward me. I swallowed hard. My instincts were screaming at me now. Something was wrong. The guy in front of me turned slightly, gesturing for me to keep moving. "Come on, man, they're just over here." But I wasn't buying it anymore. I didn't say a word. I just turned around and walked away. Not fast, not panicked, just moving with purpose. I heard him call after me, his tone shifting slightly. "Yo, where you going?" I didn't answer. I walked straight back to the lobby, my heart hammering against my ribs. The second I was back in the bright, crowded space, I felt safer. But I still didn't stop. I got right back in line at the concession stand like nothing had happened. A few minutes later, I felt eyes on me. I glanced over, and sure enough, the same guy had reappeared at the edge of the hallway. He was peeking around the corner, scanning the crowd. His eyes landed on me. For a second, we locked gazes. Then, just as quickly, he disappeared back around the corner. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay calm. I grabbed the food, made my way back to my theater, and slid into my seat beside my girlfriend just as the movie was starting. I didn't tell her. Not yet. I wanted to believe that it was over, that I had dodged whatever was about to happen back there. But then, toward the end of the movie, something made me look toward the entrance, and I saw them again. Two of them, standing just inside the doorway, wearing ski masks, not watching the movie, watching me. The moment my eyes met theirs, they turned and walked out. My blood ran cold. I checked the entrance several more times before the movie ended, but I didn't see them again. When the credits rolled, I finally turned to my girlfriend and told her everything. She listened, wide-eyed, and when we left, I was hyper-aware of my surroundings. I scanned the lobby, the parking lot, everywhere, but they were gone. That night, I called Lucas. He had no idea what I was talking about, but when I described the guy who approached me, he hesitated. "Yeah, I think I know who that is," he said slowly. "Who?" I pressed. Lucas was quiet for a long moment. Then he just said, "Stay away from him." And that was it. I don't know what those guys wanted that night, but I know one thing for sure. I walked away, and I am damn glad I did. I've always loved movies. Ever since I was a kid, I found something deeply comforting about sitting in a dark theater, losing myself in a different world for a couple of hours. Even as an adult, that never changed. A couple of years ago, I was lucky enough to live just a few blocks from a small, cozy movie theater. It wasn't the biggest or the fanciest, but it had everything I needed. Decent seats, a good screen, and most importantly, it was close enough that I could walk there whenever I felt like watching something. Most of the time I went with friends, but sometimes, when nobody was available, or when I just wanted some quiet time to myself, I'd go alone. I never really saw a problem with it. That night was one of those times. There was a movie playing that I had been wanting to see, and I had nothing else to do, so I decided, why not? It was a nice evening, a little chilly but not unpleasant, and I actually enjoyed the 10-minute walk to the theater. The streets were quiet, streetlights casting soft glows on the pavement. Everything felt normal, safe. When I got to the theater, I immediately noticed how empty it was. It was late, and this wasn't a blockbuster film, so there weren't many people inside. That was fine by me. I bought my ticket, grabbed a small popcorn and drink, and made my way inside. The auditorium was nearly empty, just a few scattered people sitting in random spots. I chose a seat somewhere near the middle, far enough away from others that I could enjoy the movie without distractions, but not so far removed that I felt isolated. The movie started, and for the next couple of hours I let myself sink into it. Everything was normal, until it wasn't. The moment the credits rolled and the theater lights slowly started coming back on, I felt something that made my stomach tighten. A tap on my shoulder. It was so unexpected, so completely out of nowhere that I jumped slightly. My body tensed. Slowly, I turned. Standing there, much too close to me, was a man. My immediate thought was that he was off. Not just in the way he looked, but in the way he felt. Something about him sent an uneasy chill down my spine. He had a messy, unkempt beard, greasy hair, and mismatched clothes that looked like they hadn't been washed in days. But more than that, he smelled. A strong, acrid scent of cigarettes clung to him, mixing with something else, something stale and unpleasant. He was smiling, a small, strange smile that didn't reach his eyes. Then he spoke. "I watched you the whole time." My blood turned to ice. At first, I didn't fully register what he had said. I blinked, confused, hoping I had misheard him. But no, he repeated himself. "You were watching the movie." He grinned wider. "But I was watching you." I felt my entire body tense. He let out a low, breathy chuckle, like he found my discomfort amusing. Then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, he turned and walked away. I didn't move. For several seconds, I just sat there, my mind racing, my skin crawling. Who was he? Had he really been watching me the entire time? How long had he been sitting behind me? I took a deep breath, trying to shake the unsettling feeling in my chest. Maybe he was just some weirdo who liked messing with people. Maybe it was nothing. But still, I didn't want to run into him again. I stayed in my seat for a little while longer, letting most of the other people clear out of the theater before I finally stood up and made my way toward the exit. I stepped into the hallway and immediately stopped. He was there, standing near the entrance to the lobby, just loitering. He wasn't looking directly at me, but he was close enough that I knew I'd have to walk past him to get out. And I didn't want to do that. My stomach twisted in anxiety. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. Then I remembered something. I'd been to this theater enough times to know that there was another way out, a less commonly used exit down a quieter hallway. Without hesitating, I turned and started walking in that direction. Out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw him shift slightly, like he had noticed me moving. I didn't stop to check, I just walked faster. The hallway was dimly lit, empty, and eerily silent. I reached the exit door, pushed it open, and stepped outside. The night air hit me immediately, cool against my skin. I was now at the far end of the parking lot, closer to the sidewalk that led back to my apartment. I let out a slow breath. I was fine. Right? Shaking off my nerves, I started walking. For the first few minutes, everything seemed normal. The streets were quiet just like before. I kept my pace steady, glancing around occasionally, but I didn't see anyone. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Soft, distant, but unmistakable. My heart stuttered. I didn't turn around right away. I didn't want to be obvious. Instead, I kept walking, listening carefully. The footsteps continued, and they were keeping pace with me. Finally, I stole a glance over my shoulder, and my stomach dropped. It was him. He was a good distance back, but he was there, following me. I forced myself to stay calm. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe he just happened to be going the same way, but my gut told me otherwise. I picked up my pace. He did too. I turned a corner. A minute later, I checked again. He had turned the corner too. At that point, I wanted to run. Every fiber of my being was screaming at me to just sprint to my apartment and lock the door behind me. But I didn't want to let him know I was panicking, so I walked. Fast. My apartment building finally came into view. Relief flooded me. Just a little farther. I reached the doors, grabbed my keys, and quickly let myself inside. The door shut behind me, locking automatically. I turned to look. He was still outside, standing on the sidewalk, staring at the entrance. I exhaled sharply, my hands trembling. He couldn't get in. I was safe. Right? I took the elevator up to my floor, walked into my apartment, locked the door behind me, and finally allowed myself to breathe. For a few minutes, I just stood there, trying to shake off the fear, telling myself that it was over. Then, a knock. A sharp, deliberate knock on my apartment door. I froze. Slowly, I crept toward the door and peered through the peephole. It was him. Somehow he had gotten inside the building. I felt a fresh wave of terror crash over me. He tried the doorknob. It was locked. Thank God. Then he took a step back and just stood there, waiting. Years ago, when I was a teenager, I worked at a local movie theater near my home. I lived with my parents at the time, in a small house just a few blocks from the theater, making it easy for me to get there for my evening shifts. It was my first real job, and even though I didn't make much money, I was proud of the responsibility it gave me. I worked in the concession stand, a job that involved selling popcorn, candy, sodas, and other snacks to moviegoers. On one particular night, I found myself working late. I was about 17 or 18 years old, and it was the kind of shift where things quieted down once the last movie of the night started. Most of the theater employees had left by then, leaving just me and one other guy, Adam, who was a few years older than me. Adam was the guy who worked the front, taking tickets. Most nights, once the last film began, Adam would lock the doors and I'd stay behind at the concessions, finishing up some cleaning until the movie ended. The theater had that familiar smell of buttered popcorn and spilled soda that seemed to cling to everything, and the quiet, empty atmosphere of the nearly deserted place always felt a bit eerie once the lights dimmed and the crowds disappeared. On this particular night, after the last movie had started, the lobby was mostly empty. I noticed that Adam was still at the front, probably cleaning up after a particularly busy showing, but I figured he'd lock the doors as he usually did. After about 15 minutes, I started to clean up the area behind the concessions counter, wiping down surfaces and making sure everything was in order. Suddenly, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement from the main lobby area. The front doors, which should have been locked, creaked open. A man entered. He looked odd from the start. His brown jacket and winter hat didn't exactly fit the usual crowd that came into the theater. What stood out even more was the way he walked. His head was tilted downward, almost like he was avoiding eye contact, and his strides were quick, as though he had some sort of purpose in mind. I noticed that he didn't stop to pay attention to me. He ignored the ticket counter entirely and passed right by me without a word. My initial thought was that maybe he had entered the theater by mistake. Perhaps he was trying to sneak into a movie, or maybe he was one of those late-night wanderers who found themselves caught in a place they didn't quite belong. The fact that the man didn't acknowledge me at all made the situation feel strange, and I couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that something wasn't right. I watched him move quickly through the lobby and into the hallway where the movie theaters were. He didn't glance back, and I didn't see him turn toward any particular theater. He just kept moving with a sense of urgency. I remained behind the counter, wondering if he'd try to sneak into the screening that was still going on. I decided to wait a few more minutes before I turned the lights off at my station. It wasn't uncommon for someone to sneak in, but it was rare for them to do it so stealthily, almost as if they were trying not to be seen. I switched the lights off and began tidying up, keeping my eye on the hallway. My shift had been relatively calm up to that point, but something about this man made me uneasy. Not long after I finished my task, I headed over to find Adam. I figured I'd let him know what had happened since the man had managed to slip past without either of us noticing. I found Adam cleaning one of the empty auditoriums, and as I told him about the man, he immediately realized he had forgotten to lock the front door. We both felt uneasy about the idea of an intruder wandering around the theater after hours. After a brief moment of confusion, Adam went back to lock the front doors, making sure that no one else could get in. We didn't know if the man had entered one of the theaters or if he was just wandering around the building, but we hoped that was the last we'd see of him. Adam and I returned to our duties, finishing up the rest of our cleaning. As the last movie came to an end, the lobby cleared out, and we were left alone in the building. It wasn't until the theater was completely empty, everyone having left, that we saw him again. At first it seemed like a random figure in the distance standing at the far end of the hallway. I didn't recognize him immediately, but as I looked closer, I saw the same man who had entered earlier. He was standing perfectly still, staring straight at us from a long distance away. His body was frozen like he was just watching us. No movement, No change in his expression, just an eerie, unsettling stillness. My heart started pounding. I felt a chill run through me as I glanced over at Adam. We both stared at him for a long moment, not sure what to do. The man wasn't making any attempt to approach us, but he wasn't leaving either. He just stood there, watching. Something about the whole situation didn't sit right with me. It wasn't normal for anyone to be hanging around after the theater had closed. No one did that, especially not in the dead of night when everything was dark, and the only sounds were the hum of the ventilation and our footsteps. I called out to him, trying to sound authoritative, though my voice was shaky. "Hey, the theater's closed now. You'll have to leave." At first, the man didn't respond. He didn't even move. I thought maybe he hadn't heard me, or perhaps he was just too lost in his own world to care. But as I walked a little closer, I couldn't help but feel a creeping sense of dread in my gut. Something was terribly wrong. Why was he still here? Why wasn't he leaving? And then, he did something unexpected. He raised his hand and waved at me. But it wasn't a friendly wave. There was no smile, no acknowledgement of the situation. He just stood there, looking at me, his hand moving in a slow, almost mechanical motion, like some kind of bizarre greeting. It felt unnatural, unsettling. I glanced at Adam, who was standing beside me, equally disturbed by what we were seeing. We both exchanged a glance and decided to move into the lobby to discuss our options. Adam suggested we could call security, or even the police, but the nearest station was far, and we didn't have much of a reason to suspect immediate danger yet. The man hadn't made any threats, but the way he was acting was off, and it felt like he was toying with us. We returned to the hallway to confront him again. To our surprise, he hadn't moved, still standing there, in the same spot, staring in our direction. His expression was unreadable. He waved again, as if mocking us, and started walking toward us. He didn't hurry, but his pace was steady. It was as if he was deliberately drawing this out, enjoying the tension. We moved quickly back to the lobby, not sure whether we should try to run or keep our distance. But when we entered the lobby, he didn't follow. It was as though he had decided that was enough, and in the next few minutes we didn't see him again. We checked the hallway, the rest of the theater, and the parking lot. The man was gone, and we couldn't find any trace of him. We searched every inch of the theater, but he had vanished without a sound. Adam and I were both rattled. It felt like he had been there just to scare us, or worse, to observe us. But why? What was his purpose? We eventually finished up our work and left for the night. I didn't work at the theater much longer after that night. The experience haunted me for weeks. I kept thinking about the man, the way he stood there, the way he watched us, and that strange, cold wave. I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible could have happened. What if we hadn't noticed him? What if we hadn't confronted him? I never saw him again after that night, but to this day, I can't shake the feeling that he was watching, that he was waiting for the right moment to make his move. The road stretched endlessly before us, the hum of the tires against the asphalt blending with the low murmur of the radio. Cindy and I had been driving for hours, the excitement of our road trip fueling us through the monotony of the long highway. It was nothing extravagant, just a much-needed getaway, a break from the daily grind of our lives. We had been best friends since high school, the kind of friendship that didn't need constant validation. We could go weeks without talking and pick up right where we left off. This trip was something we had talked about for years, and now that we were finally on the road, it felt almost surreal. The plan was simple: drive a few states away, explore some new places, and just enjoy the open road. We didn't have a strict itinerary, which made the trip feel even more freeing. But after a full day of driving, exhaustion started creeping in. "We should stop for the night," Cindy said, stifling a yawn. I nodded. "Yeah, I was just about to say the same thing. Let's find a hotel nearby." A quick search on Cindy's phone led us to a reasonably priced hotel about 30 minutes outside a major city. It wasn't fancy, but it had decent reviews, and that was all we really needed. When we arrived, the area was exactly what you'd expect from an off-the-highway stop. A cluster of businesses, a few chain restaurants, and a movie theater sitting in the next parking lot over. We checked into our room around 8 p.m. Despite the long drive, neither of us felt particularly tired. Sitting in a car all day had left us restless, eager to stretch our legs and do something, anything, before calling it a night. That's when Cindy spotted the movie theater. "Hey, why don't we check it out?" she suggested, nodding toward the glowing marquee outside. "Maybe we can catch a late-night movie." It sounded like a good idea. A quiet, relaxing way to end the night before getting back on the road the next morning. We grabbed our wallets and headed out, stepping into the cool night air. The theater was just a short walk away, sitting at the edge of the lot like a beacon of entertainment in an otherwise uneventful place. As we approached, I noticed that something felt off. The parking lot had a few scattered cars, but far fewer than I would have expected for a theater at this hour. Maybe it was a slow night, I reasoned. Still, a nagging feeling settled in my stomach. We stepped inside, and that's when everything changed. The lobby was brightly lit, exactly as you'd expect. Movie posters lined the walls. The faint smell of buttered popcorn lingered in the air, and the digital screens above the concession stand displayed movie times. It all seemed normal, except for one glaring detail. The place was completely empty. No customers, no employees, not a single soul in sight. Cindy and I exchanged uneasy glances. "Where is everyone?" she whispered. I had no answer. We hesitated for a moment before cautiously stepping further inside. The silence was overwhelming. There wasn't even the usual background noise of distant conversations or the muffled sounds of a movie playing in another room. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing slightly in the empty space. Nothing. We approached the concession stand, expecting someone to appear from the back, but no one came. The popcorn machine was off, the candy racks perfectly stocked, yet it was as if the entire staff had vanished. "This is so weird," Cindy muttered. I nodded, a prickling sensation creeping up my spine. Something about this didn't feel right. Determined to make sense of the situation, we walked toward the hallway leading to the screening rooms. The carpeted floor absorbed our footsteps, making our movements eerily silent. The hallway was lined with doors leading to various screening rooms, but they all looked wrong. Cindy reached for the door to one of the theaters and slowly pushed it open. Darkness greeted us. No faint glow of the screen, no ambient lighting, just pitch black. Goosebumps erupted on my arms. "Let's try another one," Cindy suggested, her voice quieter now. We moved further down the hallway, the air feeling heavier with every step. We tried another door. Same thing, complete darkness. A creeping sense of dread settled in my stomach. "This doesn't make any sense," I whispered. Cindy swallowed hard. "I don't like this." Neither did I. We reached the end of the hallway where a door led outside to what I assumed was the emergency exit. At this point, neither of us wanted to walk back through the empty lobby. Without speaking, we both agreed to take the exit and leave. The night air hit us as we stepped outside, and I felt a wave of relief. But that relief was short-lived. As we rounded the corner to the front of the building, we stopped dead in our tracks. The entire theater was now pitch black. Every light, every glowing sign, gone. A chill ran down my spine. We hurried to the front doors, peering inside. What had once been a brightly lit lobby was now completely dark. It looked abandoned, as if it had been closed for years. My heartbeat quickened as I reached for the door handle. Locked. Panic clawed at my throat. "How?" Cindy trailed off, shaking her head. "We were just inside." I couldn't speak. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what we were seeing. Had we imagined it? Number. We had walked through that lobby. We had smelled the popcorn. We had seen the posters. So why did it now look like it had been deserted for years? Neither of us said another word. We just turned and hurried back to the hotel, walking so fast it was nearly a jog. The moment we stepped into our room, we locked the door behind us. We didn't talk about what happened. We just put on a movie trying to distract ourselves, but I don't think either of us actually watched it. That night I barely slept. Every creak of the hotel walls, every distant car passing by, every faint sound set my nerves on edge. Morning came too slowly. As we checked out of the hotel, Cindy and I both hesitated before getting in the car. Without really discussing it, we both knew we had to drive by the theater one last time. We pulled into the parking lot, and my stomach twisted at what I saw. The building looked abandoned, not just closed for the night, abandoned. The windows were covered in dust, the doors shut tight, and the marquee, which had been brightly displaying movie titles just hours ago, was now completely blank. I felt a cold dread seep into my bones. Cindy pulled out her phone, her fingers shaking slightly as she searched for the theater online. Her eyes widened as she read aloud. It says it's been permanently closed for months. Silence. I turned back to the theater, my mind screaming for a logical explanation. There had to be one, but I couldn't find it. How had we gotten inside? How had the lights been on? And more importantly, who or what had let us in? We didn't stick around to figure it out. Cindy put the car in drive, and we left that parking lot behind, neither of us speaking until we were miles away. Even now, years later, I still can't explain what happened that night. All I know is that I never want to go back. Friday nights were always busy at our local movie theater. It was one of the nicer ones in town, clean, modern, and usually packed with people looking to unwind after a long week. My girlfriend and I had been planning this date night for a while, and when we finally arrived at the theater, the lobby was buzzing with energy. The smell of buttered popcorn filled the air, the sound of soda machines dispensing drinks hummed in the background, and groups of friends and couples shuffled around deciding on their snacks and chatting excitedly. We made our way through the line, got our tickets, and headed into the theater. The movie we had chosen wasn't the biggest blockbuster of the season, but it had been getting good reviews and we were excited to finally sit down and enjoy it. We found seats toward the back in the second to last row, a good spot for a decent view without being too close to the screen. The theater was more than half full, with most people seated toward the middle rows. Behind us, a few scattered individuals had taken their seats, but only one person sat directly behind us, a young man, probably in his early 20s, dressed casually in jeans and a hoodie. I barely noticed him at first. The movie started, and for a while, everything was normal. The dim glow of the screen cast soft shadows over the audience, and the usual sounds of people shifting in their seats, rustling popcorn bags, and taking sips from their drinks filled the air. Then, something small hit my girlfriend's shoulder. She flinched slightly but didn't react much. I turned my head slightly, confused, but assumed it was nothing. A few minutes later, another piece of popcorn landed on her lap. I frowned. This time, I turned around, looking at the guy behind us. He stared at the screen as if nothing had happened. I gave him the benefit of the doubt at first. Maybe it was an accident. Maybe he had bumped his bucket of popcorn or something. Then another piece flew over our seats, this time bouncing off my girlfriend's hair. That was no accident. I turned around again, locking eyes with him. He met my gaze but didn't say anything. He just smirked slightly and looked back at the screen. I motioned for him to stop, keeping my voice low so I wouldn't disturb the other moviegoers. He didn't react, just sat there blank-faced as if I didn't exist. For a while, things were fine. The guy stopped his antics and I started to relax, hoping we could finally enjoy the rest of the movie. Then my girlfriend whispered that she needed to use the restroom. She stood up and began making her way toward the exit. As she passed by, the guy behind us let out a sharp, piercing whistle. I stiffened, my hands clenched into fists. I turned around, anger boiling inside me. "Cut it out," I said firmly. "That's disrespectful." He just grinned and made a mocking talking motion with his hand, opening and closing his fingers like a puppet. That was it. I had kept my cool long enough. I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice so only he could hear me. "Do you want to take this outside?" His expression changed. He raised his hands, shaking his head. "Relax, man. Just watching the movie," he muttered. I glared at him for another second, then turned back around. My girlfriend returned a few minutes later, and thankfully, the guy didn't pull anything else. For a while, it seemed like he was just another audience member watching the movie. Then, without a word, he got up and left. I didn't know if he was coming back, but to my relief, he never did. When the movie ended, my girlfriend and I talked about how strange the whole situation had been. We laughed it off, thinking that was the end of it. But it wasn't. As we walked into the parking lot, the crowds had thinned out considerably. Earlier, when we arrived, we had to park far toward the back because the lot had been packed. Now only a few clusters of cars remained, scattered across the lot under dim streetlights. And then I saw him, the guy from the theater. He was standing near a car with several other young men, maybe 3 or 4 of them. They were leaned up against the vehicle, chatting and laughing among themselves. As we walked past, I could feel their eyes on us. Then the guy from the theater called out, "Hey, loser!" I tensed. He followed it up with a curse, directed at either me or my girlfriend. I wasn't sure which. I wasn't going to let it slide. "Go to hell," I shot back, my voice firm but steady. He laughed, and the rest of his group joined in. We exchanged a few more words, but I kept walking. I wasn't interested in getting into a fight over something so stupid. We reached my car, and I quickly unlocked it. My girlfriend and I got in, and I wasted no time starting the engine. But as soon as I pulled out of the parking space, I noticed movement behind us. The guys had gotten into their car and they were following us. I tried to stay calm, hoping they were just leaving at the same time by coincidence. But as we pulled onto the street, it became clear that wasn't the case. Their car stayed right on our tail. At first, they just followed at a normal distance, but within moments, their driving became erratic. They swerved slightly from side to side, jerking their car forward as if trying to intimidate us. A sick feeling settled in my gut. I didn't know what they wanted, but I knew I didn't want to find out. "I think we should go back to the theater," I said, gripping the steering wheel tighter. My girlfriend nodded quickly. "Yeah, good idea." I took a deep breath and made a U-turn at the next intersection. The guys behind us immediately did the same. They weren't just messing around. They were chasing us. For a brief moment, I wondered if they were going to try something serious, force us off the road or worse. But I pushed the thought aside and focused on getting back to safety. As we approached the theater parking lot, I spotted an open space near the entrance and pulled in quickly. The other cars slowed down but didn't follow us into the lot. Instead, they pulled into a space a short distance away. My girlfriend and I didn't wait to see what they would do next. We jumped out of the car and hurried back inside the theater, where the safety of a well-lit, crowded lobby awaited us. Once inside, I immediately went to the front desk and reported what had happened to an employee. To my surprise, he didn't seem shocked. "Yeah, we know those guys," he said with a sigh. "That one you mentioned, he and a friend were actually banned from here a few weeks ago." I felt a cold chill crawl down my spine. The employee glanced out the window, then nodded. "I'll call the cops." Within minutes, police arrived. The guys were still in the parking lot, lingering by their car. When the officers confronted them, they didn't put up much of a fight. After a brief conversation, they were told to leave and warned not to come back. My girlfriend and I waited inside the theater until they were gone. Only then did we finally drive home. That was months ago, and we still go to that theater. But every time I park in that lot, I can't help but glance around, half expecting to see him again. So far, I haven't, and I hope I never do.